everyone, and welcome to this latest instance of our Wisdom for Living series of exchanges. The theme for today's talk is ecology, environment, nature, and conservation. Now, this might be a slight shift from what you normally associate with the phrase wisdom for living, but it is much called for in the face of the overarching challenges of today. Dealing with complex issues like rapidly progressing climate change or the large-scale ecological destruction and loss of biodiversity that comes with unplanned development. The increasing instances of human-wildlife conflicts and the seeming lack of well-informed policy initiatives that tackle these issues. The challenges are overwhelming and complex, but they are unavoidable. The first step towards meeting these challenges has to be acknowledgement. And to live our lives, our day-to-day lives, while being mindful of these challenges. The steps that will eventually follow will more or less come naturally after that, and even as a consequence of that first initial step. Now, the gentleman leading the talk today is Dr. Ravi Chellam. He's a very well-renowned and accomplished biologist, conservationist, with almost 4 decades clocked in the field. He has, at various points in his career, done prominent work with leading NGOs in the field, including the Wildlife Institute of India, the United Nations Development Programme, the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, which some of us in the society will know, the Madras Crocodile Bank Trust, which most of us here will know, and of course Greenpeace. He is probably most well known for his extensive work in the conservation of the Asiatic lion. He has served as an expert scientific advisor to the Forest Bench of the Supreme Court of India, as well as having worked with the government in similar capacities on policy matters and action committees. Currently, he is the CEO of the Metastring Foundation. It's an organization which endeavors to fortify the digitization of research and documentation in biodiversity, among other fields. He is also a key member of the Biodiversity Collaborative and the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-being. Both are very ambitious initiatives geared towards the preservation and protection of India's ecology and biodiversity, both of which are key to secure a future for the coming generations. He's of course been a teacher over the years in several educational institutes of repute. He's a well-published academic with, I think, over 400 papers published, and a well-traveled public speaker. Now, all of this essentially to say that Dr. Chellam is more than well placed to inform us on today's theme and deserves our full attention. With that, the Theosophical Society would like to thank Dr. Chellam for taking the time to come visit us today and speak with us, and we welcome him to lead today's talk. Please.
Thank you, Vighnesh, for that very generous introduction. Next time I apply for a job, you're going to write my CV, and nowhere near 400 publications. 400 talks for sure, but more in the region of 50 to 80 publications. Anyway, this is a completely new talk. I have never given this talk before. This is a completely new audience, and I'm going to do this very differently. I will talk for a few minutes. If there is no engagement from the audience, we'll all be silent until somebody perks up, because I'm here to have a conversation, not to give a talk. And when Ramkumar contacted me, I was mulling around what should I talk about, and sorry for the typo there, it should have been wisdom for living. And I didn't want to come and give a lion talk or a cheetah talk. I mean, I don't know how that will inform wisdom for living. But I did think, and Vighnesh has already expounded on that, that these are concepts that we need to engage with. So what I'm aiming is to share some thoughts and experiences, try and frame and define some issues, hopefully suggest some practical options, and as I said, have a conversation and engage in a discussion. Any time is good for questions. And please call me Ravi. I will not answer if you call me by any other name. These are only 5 words, but these are words that I read long time ago, actually just after I left school, which is in the late 70s. And in many ways it informs my thinking about nature. In nature, nothing exists alone. Any thoughts, any questions, any disagreements, agreements?
Nobody wants to live alone.
So, will you live with mosquitoes?
Let's enjoy each other's company, whether it is animals or nature or people.
I think this is deeper than that. It's not about company alone.
We are part of nature.
No, it's actually nature is a whole. It can't be sort of compartmentalized. It's a whole.
Okay, we're getting there. Also, everything is connected, interdependent. There's no waste in nature. There is no vacuum in nature. There can be vacuum in our lives. We can waste. Gets India categorized as lands. Lands are not waste by nature. We go and waste it and have the arrogance to then call it wastelands. So, thought about this, put some definitions together. Often, most of us think we are apart from nature. And that's the first big mistake we do. We have evolved from nature and we're very much situated in nature and we are constantly interacting good, bad, ugly on a minute by minute basis with nature. And the minute that consciousness comes, minute that awareness comes, I think we will cross a very important threshold about how we think, how we act, how we live our lives. In very layman's term, nature is something where we have no responsibility for. And in many ways, why in many ways? Nature definitely preceded humanity. So that's another way to think in terms of timelines. And the official kind of definition is it's a collection of physical world, all the living things, big, small, microbes, worms, flies, insects, plants, giant animals, plus the physical features, rivers, mountains, plains, valleys, all of it which preceded us. We did not create any of it, and that is nature. Broadly speaking, you can divide nature into 2 bits, the abiotic and the biotic. The abiotic are the non-living parts of our environment, and the biotic are the living parts of our environment. And I did put human beings with a question mark, but this gentleman has already said we are part of nature. So for this audience, I don't think I'll have to belabor the point. Oops, sorry.
What do you mean by abiotic?
Soil, rocks, atmosphere, water. Even though life will be found on all of them, they themselves are not living components. Then there's the term environment. Is environment equal to nature? Is environment minus nature? Is it different from nature? Environment, again in the broader sense, is definitely part of nature, but you need to you need to think about it in a spatial scale. Nature is universal, environment is more immediate to you. So it's the surroundings or conditions in which a form of life lives, operates. So that's the spatial scale. But environment can also be artificial. For instance, this is a built environment, this is not a natural environment. Can somebody give me a definition for wildlife? What is wildlife? Don't say it's me.
That which is free from human intervention.
What is free from human intervention today?
All forms of life, which nature, if you like dogs, there is animal ecology. So they have become domesticated.
But there are wild dogs also.
But there are wild dogs. So they are truly part of wildlife. But you can't call a cow or a dog as part of wildlife.
Okay.
That's what I meant.
Okay. Very often most people think wildlife are large dangerous animals, right? This is a snow leopard. This is a lion, Asiatic lion from Gir, a leopard from the Western Ghats, and a tiger again from the Western Ghats. Most people's conception of wildlife, it has to be large, dangerous, it has to cause harm to human beings. Let's come and bite me, attack me, claw me, kill me, stamp me. I mean, that's the definition of wildlife in most people's mind. Then what happens to this? Are these not wildlife? And in fact, insects, by numbers and by weight, outnumber most other forms of life. And they are far more important to the survival of this planet than all those beautiful charismatic species that you just saw. What about this? What about plants in all forms? Very much part of wildlife. The other term I want you to engage with is biodiversity. Is biodiversity equal to wildlife, equal to nature, equal to environment? Is it different? It's been thrown around a lot nowadays, and there is a very important meeting coming up in a couple of weeks in Montreal called the Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biodiversity. Biodiversity is a little more expansive. You have multiple forms of biodiversity. There is wild biodiversity, as you was talking about. There is domesticated biodiversity, varieties of brinjal, varieties of rice, varieties of various fruits that we cultivate. And increasingly, there are genetically engineered forms of life which also constitute biodiversity. I'm not passing any value judgments. I'm just stating facts here. I have my opinions about genetically engineered forms of life, but that's to be taken into account. In India, it's still early days, but in many parts of the world, genetically engineered forms of life are dominating daily living. So the official definition, it refers to all forms of life that can be found on Earth. So plants, animals, fungi, lichens, microorganisms, which is viruses, bacteria, so on and so forth. But biodiversity is not individual species. It's complex of species, what we call communities, and the way the interactions and what then results. The results of biodiversity interaction is what we see as forests, as grasslands, and so on and so on, or deserts. And the other important thing is there is no good wildlife habitat or bad wildlife habitat. Desert is as good as rainforest. Marine habitats are as good as fresh water. That is nature. The natural process of evolution have led to these kind of habitats. It's only human beings in their very narrow, illiterate attitudes we define something as good and something as bad. Biodiversity also includes culture, knowledge, and the great diversity among human beings and their interactions with nature. Culture, knowledge, language, a lot of it has arisen from human beings engaging with nature. And that's something, again, we often forget. Ecology has its roots as a term from the Greek word oikos, which equals home or house. And ecology is a study of interactions. Interactions between species and the abiotic environment. And this is trying to understand what really happens. We often see the results, but unless we understand what happens, we can't intervene as required either to domesticate animals and plants for our own well-being, or in this case now to actually stem the loss, the problems that we are facing. How do we reverse land degradation? How do we reverse biodiversity loss? How do we mitigate climate change? And all of this is going to come purely from an understanding of ecology. Technology is, engineers can't do this. I mean, one of the few things engineers can't do. Engineers believe they run the world, but nature runs the world. It's about time engineers realize that. Ecology is the process. Ecosystems are the physical units. And there are multiple ecosystems. We often loosely talk of forest ecosystems, but in India alone you have what, 60, 80 types of forest ecosystems. If you look at grasslands, we have grasslands which are a few inches tall to what, 12 feet tall, which is all a function of the soil in which they grow, the climate in which they grow, the amount of rainfall that they get, the amount of sunshine they get, the slope of the land, whether it's north facing or south facing. The complexities are mind-boggling. And ecosystems again consist of biotic and abiotic components, and that interaction is what produces the ecology. And ecosystem services. That might sound a new term here. Pollination. It is nature doing a job for us. Can you imagine going out and pollinating every grain of rain? Rice is wind pollinated. Let's look at fruits and vegetables, which are insect and bird pollinated. If insects go, your pollination mechanisms are going to collapse. Oilseeds, for instance, are all insect pollinated. Every mustard, you owe it to an insect. Actually, not mustard. Mustard is self-pollinated. I'm getting all my things wrong now. It's self-pollinated. But pollination is one. Water. We all turn our taps and get our water. But the rainwater that comes down works through a system of forests or whatever is the natural vegetation and terrain, and then you get filtered, enriched water in many ways in terms of the minerals that it leaches into it. Firewood for fuel, for building, timber for building. It's all products of ecosystem. And typically an ecological community will consist of multiple populations of multiple species. I mean, there's no ghettoization in nature. That's a very unique human attribute. Another way to look at an ecosystem is a specified geographic area where the living part of the ecosystem, the weather, the physical aspects of the ecosystem work together to create a bubble of life. Each ecosystem is unique. And for instance, let's look at coral reefs. The coral reefs off the coast of Tamil Nadu are very different from the coral reefs off the coast of Gujarat. Forget the coral reefs off the coast of Australia. They're all coral reefs. But they are very different because they are unique to the location, unique to the latitude in which they are located, unique to the temperatures and all of that operate on them. We as human civilization have obviously recognized ecology and ecosystems and created our own agricultural ecosystems and increasingly what are called production ecosystem, plantation agriculture and things like that. And as I said, are built ecosystem. And built doesn't necessarily mean rooms alone. It can be larger spaces where we modify the kind of vegetation that you want, semi-open, tents, all of that constitute built ecosystems. There's only one guarantee in life for all of us. What is that? Death. Similarly, there's only one guarantee in life for species. That is extinction. Extinction is forever. Whatever science fiction can say, people can say test tube this, that, we will preserve. Crap. It's not happening. Because if you don't have the habitat, if you don't have the space, whatever you have in test tubes cannot take life again. And when nature does all of this for free, why do you need to use imperfect science to try and better nature in some sense? Extinction is a natural process, but currently we are in the midst of what's called as the 6th mass extinction phase, because in the natural process, it's a very few number of species that go extinct, 1 to 5 every year. It's part of the process of evolution. As species go extinct, new species will evolve and try and replace them in some form or the other. Human caused extinction rates are of the order of 1,000 to 10,000 times. There's no way evolution is going to keep pace with something like that. So we're talking of dozens of species going extinct every day. And many of these species we don't even know because they've not been described, they've not been discovered. It's not part of scientific knowledge. It might be part of some traditional knowledge, but it's definitely not part of scientific knowledge. And to give you some reference, there is consensus now that this extinction phase is the worst spate of extinction since the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. I don't even know how many zeros are there, but that's the kind of time span we are talking of. And unfortunately, we believe by the end of this century, up to 1 million species might go extinct. They are at least at risk. Whether they go extinct or not depends on what we do in the remaining years leading up to the end of the century. So, again, not such great news, but are we willing to take responsibility? Clearly, if we trust our politicians to deliver on this, you can kiss everything goodbye. That's not happening. That is not happening because, as I will come later, politicians operate on 4, 5 or 6 year time frames, which is the election cycle. Companies operate on a 3-month cycle, which is a quarterly corporate reporting cycle. Some might operate on a 1-year cycle. Nature does not operate on those cycles. Evolution does not operate on those cycles. So when people function primarily with short-term goals, they will not engage with longer-term goals because they don't care. And that understanding has to come to all of us, because environmental catastrophes does not choose the rich or the poor or the higher caste or the upper class, the Hindus or the Muslims. When catastrophe comes, it's going to hit all of us. It's going to hit all of us with such force that it's going to be too late to try and take action. The problem is our memories are too short. Chennai has faced flooding not so long ago. Bangalore has faced flooding not so long ago. Heat waves have come. What is the action we are doing? We are still tolerating destruction of nature in the name of development. What development when clean air, clean water is not available, when still millions go hungry to bed? We need to be able to understand this and use a completely different metric and mindset to understand and think about development. This extinction crisis is caused by me, you, and all of us. It's a human cost. I mean, Trump can say whatever he wants, I don't care. It is caused by humans. The evidence is overwhelming. It's out there if you want to read it. There are various ways we do it. One is, of course, habitat loss, which is go and destroy, be it desert, grassland, marine ecosystem, freshwater. You destroy it, that ecosystem is gone. The other not so recognized impact we have is called fragmentation. You put a road through a forest, you build a pipeline, you build a canal, that's called fragmentation. And then modification and degradation. Probably even till now, the forestry operations think grasslands are not good enough, so we will plant trees in them. That's the modification and degradation I'm thinking of. Or our native species are not good enough, let us plant teak trees. So where in 1 hectare there might be 100 different species of plants, we go and bung every single tree is a teak tree of the same age. In no natural forest would all the plants be of the same age. The next set of issues is when we go and kill animals directly. Through hunting, through poaching. Wildlife trade is not recognized enough. It is, I think, the 3rd or the 4th in terms of volume of money. This is after drugs, arms, maybe it is the 3rd. I mean, you're talking of billions of dollars annually. For instance, pangolin, which is what people call anteater, there are ship containers of dead pangolin going. I mean, can you imagine how many pangolins can go into a container? And you're talking of multiple containers. That's the scale at which we are destroying nature. And the other, eating. No, primarily the scales are also used, but the meat is used for eating. It's specialty cuisine. I don't mind that, but grow your own pangolin, no. Then, on a daily basis, the number of reptiles, amphibians, insects, even birds and small mammals that get killed because we drive on roads, they are on the road, we run over them. There are nocturnal animals, our headlights are on, these poor creatures get attracted to the cars and come and crash on your windscreen. In the name of safety, we are lighting up the world, and that's completely screwing up life for nocturnal species. We put power lines which many flying animals are unable to detect. And one of the big, you might have heard about the great Indian bustard, which is critically endangered. One of the major causes of their mortality is overhead power lines. These are heavy birds with eyes to the side. When they fly, they don't see the power line. By the time they get to it, it's too late. They crash and they die. And there are only about 150 of those birds left. All of us want renewable energy, wind turbines. If we locate the wind turbines in the wrong place, they are chopping up everything that flies. On top of that, there's of course climate change, there's land degradation, there's pollution of all types. I don't know whether we realize there's air, water, land, light, noise, and much more, and noise even in the seas. With the amount of shipping going on, the vocal communication between whales and other aquatic mammals is completely disturbed, and they're disoriented now. You often hear of dolphins beaching. One of the causes we think is because of the noise pollution that is out there in the... Then there is invasive species. This is among the top 5 reasons as to why the biodiversity crisis. We like plants which we think are cute and nice. They are ecologically displaced from South America or Africa into India. There are no predators for these plants. Lantana is a good example. Parthenium is another good example. And they just take over. And invasive species are not just plants. They can be animals. They can be insects. And it's a multi-billion-dollar cost that we are paying on an annual basis. Diseases, I don't have to belabor the point. COVID is not that long ago. And that's again an environmental destruction, climate change related issue. But my bigger fear is ecosystem functioning is unraveling. And we don't have the skills to put it back together. If pollination stops, how do we deal with it? If a water filtration stops, how do we deal with it? If decomposition stops, we will really be in shit then. And it's impacting evolution. And how do we deal with that? I mean, none of our lives is long enough to even recognize these impacts. No questions? That's been a long spiel from me. Okay? I think this should be the 4th part of the title. What is conservation? Does anybody want to hazard a guess? This is not conservative, but what is conservation? MNS members, come on. What is conservation? நான் பேசுறேனா?
Efforts that we take towards preserving.
Preserving what and for what?
For longevity of the species, for betterment of the land, whatever.
Okay, to reverse extinction. Then are we addressing individual animals? Are we addressing populations of animals?
Ideally population.
You can only address populations. If it is conservation, you can only address populations. Because death is guaranteed, right? So you really have to talk about persistence of populations. But populations don't exist in vacuum. What about their habitats? What about their ecosystems? So you can see how conservation is widening, broadening, getting more complicated. What about connectivity? Because we've kind of chewed up the land, we cut up the forests. If there is 300 square kilometers, surrounding landscape does not allow animals to move. Then what happens? So connectivity is also equally important. And what time frames do we work with? What do you think is the longest conservation project in this country? In some form or the other, it is Project Tiger, 1973. Okay? okay? That is quite remarkable. I mean, but that's only one species. There has been legislation on elephants and lions before that in the 50s, but a formal conservation project, the first conservation project, is Project Tiger, going back to 1973. Typically in conservation, we advise people not to think anything less than 25 years, ideally 50 to 100 years. That's a realistic time frame. We cannot work with a 5-year plan and so, I mean, you might want to zero in terms of budget, but you really need the long-term thinking to be able to do justice.
How do you handle conservation, keeping in mind sustainability? Like, say, people have to live on the edges of the forest or the Maldives in Gujarat, or how does that work then? I mean,
Works perfectly fine. India is a shining example as to what we call coexistence today, that people and nature actually can live together. It's our official conservation policy which erroneously thinks that to conserve nature, you need to move people out. Science doesn't tell you that. Practice doesn't tell you that. Knowledge doesn't tell you that. We have adopted a Western model, basically the Yellowstone model, which is the world's first national park, and brought it in here without trying to socialize it to India's conditions. A country with 1.4 billion people, if it still has thriving populations with tigers, lions, leopards, snow leopards, elephants, gaur, 3 species of bear, and I could go on, of which 50% of these populations are not even within protected areas, what does that tell you? So the old discredited model of conservation is what is called as the fortress model of conservation, where you build walls, fences, or draw lines on a map and say, this is wildlife habitat, that is people's habitat. But in reality, even in most of our national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, there are people either living or coming and going on a daily basis or a seasonal basis. And also, what kind of protected area can we think of when climate change is operating? Does climate change know borders? It doesn't even know international borders, forget knowing protected area borders. And I hope the penny will drop in Delhi sometime. And let's not forget, we have the Forest Rights Act going back to 2006 now, which is more than 15 years, and it legally gives rights to forest dwellers. And the conservation community has behaved very, very shamelessly and badly by saying Forest Rights Act will kill conservation in this country, with no evidence but for rhetoric. And the people who say that have never gone hungry to bed. So they really have no understanding of how things work on the ground. These are your powerful, connected, rich, often tourist operators. Because for them, this Eden, pristine nature needs to be presented to the tourists. Are there costs related to conservation? And I'm not talking just of rupees or dollars. And when you dislocate people, you dislocate their lives, you dislocate their connection to nature, you dislocate their knowledge system, you dislocate their social relationship. And that's happening even with the cheetah project right now. And who bears the cost and who reaps the benefit? And it's just entrenching existing class divides. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. So I started by asking, what is conservation? It's protecting species from extinction, maintaining and restoring habitats, enhancing ecosystem services, and protecting biodiversity broadly, more generally. And that means addressing biological aspects, addressing abiotic aspects, and also recognizing there are long-term processes like evolution that you need to keep in mind when you plan and take action. I think this is my last text slide. There are various models of conservation. The most recent that's being touted is something called 30 by 30. And lo and behold, who endorses it? The Bezos of the world and the Musks of the world endorse it. What do they want? 30% of marine aquatic habitats, 30% of terrestrial habitats to be set aside for conservation. What is the carbon footprint on a daily basis of the Musks and Bezoses of the world? What arrogance to then say we need to set aside these kind of things? Who is asking these questions? Why are we not asking these questions? And we talked about forest conservation. Community conservation is the way to go, especially in a country like India. We are talking of tens of millions of people engaging with nature on a daily basis. 50% of our tigers are not in protected areas. More than 50% of our lions are in villages and cities and towns and things like that. Leopards, 4,000 leopards are not, I mean, every big city seems to have a leopard population at some time or the other. If wildlife has to be restricted to protected areas, what happens to wildlife which is in human habitats? Do we just take a gun and shoot all of it? If people have to live with wildlife, why can't, in wildlife habitats, people continue to exercise their rights? And as I said, coexistence is the way to go. There is momentum gathering now. In fact, for the last year, I've been engaged with a process called the Coexistence Consortium. I think we're getting more and more live examples of how coexistence can happen. And drawing these squiggles, little rounds and rectangles and squares on a map, and saying this is wildlife habitat, rest is not wildlife habitat, is in many ways signing the death sentence for many of the species. Because they are small populations. Our average protected area is less than 200 square kilometers. And a normal tiger territory, a male is about 50, 60 square kilometers. So in 200 square kilometers, how many male tigers can exist? So ecology does not agree with the conservation models that we are adopting. And also, where do the threats actually come from? Is it from the local villages, or is it from industrial model of development consumption? If that is where the threats are coming from, why are we directing our conservation action against the local communities and not asking the bigger questions, not questioning the model of development that we are practicing? And as I said, with sections of society across the world, I mean, there's of course the West and the East divide, but even within India, some of us live more than the best of the West lifestyle. I don't think just pointing fingers outside the country is going to resolve the problem. What can we do? Simple things. Just be curious. Engage with issues. Ask questions. Try and learn. We often, over dinner tables and friends gathering, talk about films, sports, politics, religion. Why don't we talk about ecology? Why don't we talk about conservation? This is truly what is going to change your lives. How long can any of you live without air? How long can any of you live without water? I mean, these are basic. Forget the rest of the trappings that come with nature. And please raise your voice. The time to keep silent is long gone. Each of us can lower our carbon footprint by making the right choices, consuming less, and making it fashionable to live a low-impact lifestyle. And in general, be ethical and kind. Violence and conservation, violence in any form and conservation does not gel at all. And don't tell me what about tigers hunting deer, that's not violence, that's ecology. Or snakes biting or whatever, that is not violence. Human beings are uniquely evolved to create violence. There is value for peace. And peace, I'm not just talking of the Russia-Ukraine thing, investment in military cannot be justified anymore. We are talking of global geochemical cycles, global. These cycles know no boundaries, climate change know no boundaries. What are we defending them? Why are we, and all military activity, production means increased carbon footprint. There's none that is environment friendly. In the name of conservation, this is what we do. Not a happy picture at all. This is the border between Nagarhole and a village. The tusker somehow got on the other side and overnight tried to come back. And this is a tall, old rail fence. And it got its forelegs across and then it couldn't come. And it just collapsed on its own weight and died. This is conservation. And 1 kilometer of this fence is a few crores of rupees. Who's asking these questions? Anyway, to more happier pictures, I cannot but show a few pictures of lions. I mean, that would be treason if I don't do that. These are a few cubs, probably the most handsome male picture from Gir that I've seen. Lioness with cubs, and lo and behold, Gir when it's green. All of you would only see grays and browns, but I had the good fortune of working there for 4 years, so I lived through the monsoon. This is also how conservation happens in India. As I said, wildlife doesn't know protected area boundaries. This is Tumkur Engineering College. A leopard was found in the terrace, and the hullabaloo, it jumped down. And sometimes people do take law into their hands. And we cannot grudge them that. If you lost your child, your spouse, your brother, what do you think you're going to do? Here's another case where a leopard has died. Look at how the old woman is addressing the leopard, and look at the curiosity with which the younger generations look. This is the magic of India, right? And this is what enables wildlife still to really survive. I'm not discrediting, undermining official role of either scientific institutions or the government, but they alone cannot do it. Last 2 or 3 slides. I don't know how I'm doing for time.
15 minutes.
Okay. This is my first picture of a lion, December of 1985. I grew up in Madras. I did try to study Hindi in school, but never got good at it. So I then decided to join the Wildlife Institute of India, got this lion project, and December they sent me to Gir, say, go scope, fix your field site and start your work. I had never seen a lion before in my life, so I said, good, let's go and do it. 4 days I walked around, I didn't see a lion. I had quit a marketing career to get into wildlife, so I was beginning to question the wisdom of that decision. I heard them roar at night, I saw their pug marks, I saw their droppings, I saw kill remains, but no lion. Last evening, we were walking back, and out of the bush, say about 100 meters, 4 lions emerged, and I was scared. So I talked to this young boy who was my guide and asked him in my broken Hindi, what should we do? And he just said this. So I held my breath, kept quiet. These lions kept coming towards us, kept looking. He didn't seem flustered at all. By the time I realized I had my camera, binoculars, and these are meant to be used, 3 of those lions had disappeared. I got this photograph. Took me about 6 months to do this. That's me in the foreground with lions in the background. And here I'm not trying to be a hero or anything. The only way we could recognize lions is by looking at their whisker spot patterns. And you can see the amount of grass and vegetation. You can have the best camera, telescope, binoculars. If you're 50 meters away, all you will see is a screen of vegetation. So one had to negotiate this and do this. These are very unique animals. This is a subadult radio-collared male sleeping on a hot afternoon. Crept up to it, didn't know I have come. And I didn't have fancy equipment. Mine was a 35-105 mm lens. So I had to get pretty close to these animals to take these pictures. So old style camera, heard the shutter go. And look at the response. It's not aggression, it's curiosity. You can also do this with Gir lions. That's my own shadow. These are what I would call as negotiated settlements. You take time to figure out how the animal is behaving and then do this. Don't ask me why I did it, young and crazy. But this is also how conservation works. This is the middle of the national park. What do you see in the background? A public state transport bus. Thank you for the opportunity. I never get tired about talking about lions because most Indians do not realize we have a thriving lion population which needs attention. And it's not unusual for me at the end of the talk to somebody say, hey, by the way, what about the tiger? I mean, they're so trained to think about large cats as either tigers or leopards. But I hope all of you will appreciate, learn more about lions. And Gir is also a lot more than animals. It's about landscapes, sunrises and sunsets. Madras is still pretty good. You get to watch. If you're living in North India, God bless you. Thank you very much. I'm open to more questions.
So you spoke so much about conservation and what people can do and what the government is not doing, the politicians are not doing. Responsible tourism. Like today, everybody travels everywhere and wildlife and visiting Gir or Ranthambore and all these wildlife reserves is becoming trending, right? Everybody wants to visit these places and take their kids and families for vacation. But there is heights of, you see idiotic, if I may say, activities that happen. And even the guides who are in these forests, now you've spent so much time in Gir, so you know exactly what I'm talking. The, how, yeah.
Three words.
Yes.
Lower your carbon footprint, be conscious, be ethical and kind.
But
That's all I can say.
a common man who's coming, they're so not bothered.
Do you drive on Madras roads?
Yeah.
That's the common man, right? That's what you are dealing with. I mean, it happens in zoos. People go and throw stones. Oh, the tiger is sleeping. Daytime tigers sleep, yeah. That's ignorance. That's the problem.
And I wanted you, if you could share some light on what is happening with RA forests. Because,
Don't know.
okay.
What do you think about the cheetahs that have landed in India?
They landed.
How do you see that?
They might not take off.
They are supposed to have had their first hunt.
Very good.
Following on that,
One hunt doesn't make a summer.
following on that, do you think like the Asiatic lions should also be transferred to some other place for them?
Not also. The Supreme Court in 2013 ordered the translocation of lions within 6 months. So if you are a law-abiding society, what should we do?
Will they do it?
Who's they?
The Gujarat government.
Are we the citizens? Supreme Court, does it know state boundaries? You can't say, I will stop at red light but not implement line translocation, no? Law of the land is law of the land. We can't pick and choose which law we like. Should not, at least.
Coming closer to where we are, the Arya River, a lot of desilting had taken place, and the river as such is flowing much better than before. Earlier it used to stay, now the river flow is very clear. The only thing is, in the process, there are no landings for the birds which used to come earlier. Even amidst that, smaller and a lot of birds, like pelicans, painted.
Pelicans don't need land. They happily land in water.
No, but then they do rest in water.
No, if there is land, they'll find land somewhere else. They'll find land somewhere else. So you can't have it both ways, no? You can't have a flowing river and you can also not have...
You just see here, Arya stretch, Manapakam, that is one example. And currently here, behind Gandhinagar, there is a lot of green going on. Manapakam, they have sort of some side borders. So the birds, over they swim, they would like to sort of relax on this. This is what I have observed even
No, in an urban situation, they are prone to attacks by dogs, crows, cats and things like that, especially heavier birds. So they will like the isolation either of a tall tree or a water-surrounded habitat. They are not going to land on the bank.
What I am saying is, I have been observing it for the last 4-5 years. I go out birding to all the local spots. And especially a lot of birds used to even come behind the reservoirs. Now the birds have just...
I mean, you have Geeta and others who probably know this better than I do. I don't live here, so I can't give you an answer.
Then I am asking the wrong question.
Absolutely.
The indigenous population, either in the Satyamangalam Reserve or Andiur Forest, nowadays, now they are planning to make it as a natural reserve. So they are facing problem where they are making them force them out of the forest and not allowing them to gather the natural products which they need in the forest. So the forest officials look at the villages with suspicion. So that is what is happening.
It's a power dynamic. Policeman looks at us with suspicion. No? The forest department is a policeman in the forest. What they need is to understand that they have rights under the Forest Rights Act. Almost in every such area, there will be some NGOs, some academic. So that's the way to do it. we often have to teach the Forest Department what the Forest Rights Act is.
In the same way, I'm asking, there are some remote villages. There are some remote villages and there are some schools, primary schools inside the villages. But the access roads are so bad that the children cannot attend the schools. So is it okay to have roads? Will it affect the conservation effect?
It will definitely affect, but these are cost benefits you have to take. It is also not correct to expect isolated populations to be denied education. It might be better to take education to them than to try and transport the children to a far-off location.
Yeah, when we talk about conservation, we always talk about conserving a forest or a species or whatever. But we often forget about how conservation affects marginalized people. Like those standards has to be made. Right?
Yeah, that's what I said. Now, who bears the cost and who reaps the benefit? We don't ask these questions. And much of our conservation, in the name of wildlife at least, is illegal because the 1972 Act was very clear saying you can't move people without recording and settling their rights. And we have failed quite miserably there. And after 2006, the Forest Rights Act also strengthens the rights for forest dwelling people. But the Forest Department has taken a completely adversary view on this. And Tamil Nadu is a particularly bad case. It is a laggard in implementation Forest Rights Act. Sugata was here.
So is there anything that as individuals we can sort of contribute to this? Any of this? We have been asking questions.
Prime Minister's office gaidinala. Chief Minister's office gaidinala.
I have never reached out to politicians directly.
They are accountable to us, right?
Yeah.
They can't be a power of their own.
Yeah.
They have to be accountable. If 10,000 residents of Madras write to the Chief Minister, don't you think he'll take it seriously? Don't do a copy paste. Write in your own language. We have to show that we care. If we care, can't we write a letter? And nowadays it's all emails or even a tweet, strange beast that I don't understand.
What I understand is millions such mails reach some of these ministers.
Sir, if you are going to be pessimistic, I cannot help you.
No, it's not being
Conservation la pessimism ku room mein kadayadu.
No, what I am saying is without reaching out to them, is there any other thing that we can sort of as individuals, you said that you
Hunger strike.
No, I don't think. See, what you said initially, that politicians, they are not going to, because they are operating on a 5-year-old cycle.
But they also worry about winning the next election.
No, that's,
if a significant number,
Yeah.
if there is something in the media, look at how the speed with which potholes are filled in Bangalore.
Yeah.
Once there is an accident or there's some bad media, then they will fill the pothole.
Yeah, that's true, very much true. But then more, people come forward to do that. But
So tell me where I can go and talk again tomorrow, I'll do this.
Yes,
I mean, 80 people a day is good enough for me.
No, I was thinking that, basically you already have such interactions with the...
There is no sophisticated magic bullet, silver bullet. If you are still a democracy, people power has to come to the fore.
Yeah.
Probably
Thank you.
go to those remote villages and start teaching, on a weekend or something. If you are nearer to that place.
If it is within a forest.
Provided you have to have a place to stay and do that. I think it is doable.
Okay.
You said you can write letters to the CM cell. Now the latest rule is if the letter is in Tamil, we will respond.
உனக்கு தமிழ் தெரியுமேம்மா
இது எழுதுறியா அதே?
அது யாராவது ஒரு ஸ்கிரைபை கற்றுக்கோ கிருஷ்ணன்கள்
அது சரி.
Anybody would like to ask question, please raise your hand. I can bring the mic to you.
No, this is just a question about trees and scrub, what you call wasteland, grassland, all of that. You see, one is you see large scale planting of eucalyptus for some reason everywhere.
That's more or less stopped now.
Yeah,
That's
and the
more or less
other
stopped.
thing is, as citizens in cities, say like Chennai, which I think earlier was probably more scrub. Should we be planting different kinds of trees? See, we do native trees, but maybe they are not scrub. So, I mean, what exactly? So, this whole business of the urban ecosystem as a, as what can be done there, because that also, we can do something there. So,
Nothing can happen overnight. As old trees die, or whatever happens to it, replace them with native species, and ideally fruiting, flowering species. Much of Bangalore, unfortunately, is with exotic species. It is a bit of a British legacy, of course, and it is also causing enormous health problem. The pollen is foreign. People are not adapted to the pollen. A lot of the respiratory diseases because of foreign pollen also. So there are a lot of downstream effects. You don't know what it does to the hydrology. It is definitely not providing food or shelter. It will provide shelter, but definitely not food to local biodiversity. And we all know what has happened with lantana. I mean, it came as an ornamental and it's taken over bulk of a forest. So try and go native species. The problem is, I think even today, bulk of the nurseries don't have sufficient stock of native species. So it's still peltophorum and things like that, which are not native to India. But that's the push again we should be making. But I will not recommend large-scale cutting of existing trees, because that will have the negative impact.
Pruning can be done.
Pruning has to be done, otherwise it's going to fall on somebody.
That is the problem in our side of the...
No, most cities have fairly good groups who know how to do it. I'm sure Madras people here would...
Outside trees, only the corporation can do.
No, but they can take the expertise from people. In Bangalore, I know they have a group which actually transplants trees. So if you need to cut it, they will take it and plant it somewhere else. Yeah, Bharat.
Ravi, thanks. Quite, should I say, good learning for me, listening to you. While you're talking about this, I want to also highlight some of the good things that are happening. Because what I'm hearing right now is all things that we need to do or something which is not happening. But I'm sure there are a lot of things that are happening around which is working towards conservation and things like that. Can you highlight some of them? Because I've been to Andaman and Nicobar, and I see that there is a good amount of environmental, I'm not using the right words, but I can see that there's a lot of conservation happening out there.
It's interesting you pick up Andaman and Nicobar. The government has just sanctioned the destruction of Great Nicobar.
Okay.
So that's what I said it in one sentence. No longer can destruction of natural ecosystems be justified, be it 1 square meter or be it 300 square kilometers. We cannot afford to destroy nature anymore. If I didn't say it, I will say it. India is in many ways the leader in conservation, partly to government, partly due to other forces. The fact is, the other force's voice is seldom heard or acknowledged. It is definitely not inculcated enough in policy. We always have the government version, and they have a bigger megaphone, they have access to resources, you hear it. You go to an international summit, it's the government point of view that prevails, which is not to in any way undermine, decry what they've done. But if they do 10% conservation and do 90% destruction, the equation doesn't add up. I mean, what is the point in planting 2 mangroves in Bali when you have destroyed Great Nicobar? I mean, symbolism also has to have some sense, no? Sense of proportion. Why are lines not translocated despite a 2013 court order? How did cheetahs come to India when they don't even figure in a National Wildlife Action Plan?
So I have another question. Like it's two questions. So one is regarding this rapid urbanization with cities growing fast, and we have been extending our urbanization area. So obviously, when urbanization expands, obviously urban heat islands will also expand. So when such kind happens, that's what happened in Bangalore. Like with rapid urbanization, the urban heat islands got extended, and the flooding happened recently. So my question is how to tackle this in urban setup, how to tackle the conservation in urban setup. And also this COP which we have, which is going on right now, like COP27, yeah. So the compensation between the
That doesn't seem to be happening. They've diluted the language even more, is what I understand. I'm not following that very closely. But the rich are again trying to get away. In Glasgow, they made the commitment that before Sharm el Sheikh, they will make payments. None of that has happened. And they're just pushing, I mean, it's election, right? They want to win the next election. They're kicking the ball down the road. But to your first question, don't destroy nature. Whatever little is left of it. Make sure you get tree cover or even terrace garden cover. A terrace which has plants is very different to terrace without plants. Don't cut off water channels. Don't build on stormwater drains. See, these are, I mean, I've been, as a child also, I come from Tirunelveli, paddy fields would be cleared and they would build a bus stand there. In Bangalore, they have cleared lake beds and built houses with basement parking. What do you expect to happen? Why are you surprised it's getting flooded? Konchamaadi irukku vandama.
Chennai, we have a Parandur airport which is coming out. Like they are destroying like thousands of lakes in Parandur area. So to build an airport.
And we are a water deficit city.
Yeah.
Flats are coming up.
So idalanda solno. I mean, flat owners should be told. At least they should know that they are buying properties that will be flooded.
They don't even have drainage.
No, it will get flooded. See, water will seek the lowest point. You can't train the river to flow some other way, no?
No, they are draining it into the wetlands which are still not
I don't know the space, but in general, it's a bad idea to try and reroute.
part of the city.
Which is why this interlinking of rivers la summa kada. It will never work. Apart from other things, each river has its own geochemical, biological properties. So, Nama ex-president, he thought, northeast is surplus of water, northwest is poor water. Or straw mardi pota apdi thanni vandrum. So ecological illiteracy is no longer justified. I mean, it's a greater sin than any of the other sins that whichever religious text you follow. It has to be added top. And ecological destruction in top of that.
I was just saying the best way to save the environment is, stop human intervention. Just
Climate change, sir.
just it's because of human intervention. No? Basically,
No, but
because
climate change is run away now. It's not going to stop in a short time.
Yeah. No, wherever urgency is required, there, of course, our intervention in terms of sort of
But
reversing
the easiest way to kill every human being, then nature will revert back.
COVID, during COVID times, I found, generally the
No, that's a very skewed perspective from urban India.
Yeah.
Okay, we are still eating.
Yeah.
What didn't happen was traffic or travel. That is the only thing that went down.
No, even the public space, the space for the birds.
Because we were in our houses.
Yeah, that's
Because we
the
were
thing.
in our houses.
So I was
And that's also not a realistic way to
No, that's true.
live.
Yeah. That's one of the guidelines we can say, that if we stop meddling with things, things take care of themselves.
The very fact we are born on this earth, we are meddling with things.
Yeah.
It's the scale of meddling that we need to think about. Because
No.
we have a carbon footprint.
No, that's true. That we are talking only about 300 years. Prior to that.
Even before that, it was much more local. It was not at the scale.
Yeah.
Many civilizations have collapsed because ecology was destroyed.
Yeah.
Because disease spread, because water was not there, or they got flooded, because agriculture failed. That's how civilization, Mayan...
That should be a part of natural calamity. That's part of nature.
No, for the entire civilization to collapse?
It's not because of humans, We are talking about humans.
No, I'm talking of humans. Because sanitation wasn't good, or you're over-hunted, or you're over-cut the forest. It was utilization at levels that was not sustainable.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravi, for being here and delivering us absolutely important subject. we have to think about it really, what we personally do, and as collectively also, I think. So anyway, I want to give you, as a memory, a book. This is about ADR, this campus, and this is perhaps a bit more different aspect that you are used to, this kingdom of gods, but it is about nature. There is much more than we see with our eyes. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have to announce the close. Thank you everyone for joining.